When my daughter stood in the doorway and said, "If you're staying here, you'll do as Aiden says. Or you can leave," I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I didn't even ask why. I just looked at her, really looked, and saw someone I didn't recognize anymore. So I walked up the stairs, opened my closet, and pulled out the same suitcase I once packed for my honeymoon. The same one I'd later used when moving into our first family home. Funny, isn't it, how a piece of luggage can hold so many beginnings and endings? I zipped it closed slowly, like I was sealing off a version of myself. Then I walked past the photos on the wall, the wedding I paid for, the graduation I financed, and stepped out the front door of the house I had worked my whole life to provide. She expected tears. She expected begging. What she didn't expect was silence. And silence, I've learned, can be louder than any goodbye. The spring sunlight poured through the kitchen window like it always did. Soft, golden, the kind that used to make my old house feel warm. That day, though, it didn't warm me. It passed over my shoulder like I wasn't even there. I had just come back from the grocery store, 2 paper bags digging into my forearms. I let out a breath, nudged the front door shut with my foot, and walked toward the kitchen. The weight of the milk and cereal was nothing compared to the weight I carried in my chest. The kind you don't measure in pounds, but in years. Aiden was sitting in Richard's recliner again. That recliner had once been sacred ground in this house. My late husband Richard always kept it tidy. Never so much as a sock out of place. When he passed, I didn't have the heart to move it. It stayed right there by the fireplace, untouched, like a monument to the man who built this family. Now, Aiden sprawled across it like it was his throne, legs wide open, socks dirty, a beer bottle swinging from his hand. The remote was tucked into the fold of his stomach like it belonged there. He didn't even look at me, just muttered, "Grab me another one from the fridge while you're at it. The cold ones, not that off-brand stuff you drink." I didn't answer right away. I set the bags on the kitchen counter quietly, deliberately. My hands were red from the weight, but I didn't complain. Not yet. He looked over just once, then turned back to the game. "You hear me?" I turned to face him. My voice stayed calm, low. "Aiden, I just walked in. I'd like to put these away first." That was apparently too much to ask. He sighed, annoyed, like I was inconveniencing him. "You're already standing. It's not that hard." I blinked, almost like I was trying to reset the moment. But it didn't reset. It never did. That's how it had been for the past year, said. Slowly, bit by bit, I'd gone from being Dorothy Bennett, the woman who raised Chloe on her own after Richard died, who paid for college, cooked every holiday dinner, kept the house running, to someone who should be grateful to live under their roof. Even though the house was mine, even though the roof was paid with my money and the mortgage was in my name, even though I'd taken $80,000 from my retirement to help them buy it after the wedding, this was still supposed to be home. My home. But Aiden made it clear time and time again that I was just in his way. He stood up taller than me, using his frame to fill the space between us. I didn't flinch. I'd lived through harder things than a grown man trying to act big. "Look, Dorothy," he said, half smiling like he was trying to be civil. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. You want to live here peacefully? You do your part. That means when I ask for something, I don't get back talk. Back talk." That word stung more than I expected. I wasn't a child. I was a woman nearing 70 who had worked full-time until she was 65, paid off debts, lost a husband, and raised a daughter alone. And I was being told to behave. The kitchen door creaked open. Chloe walked in, drying her hands with a towel. She saw us standing there, me with clenched fingers, him puffing up his chest, and her expression shifted instantly. That familiar look of teenage exasperation washed over her face. "What's going on?" she asked, though she already knew. Aiden didn't wait a beat. "Your mom's making drama." "I asked for a beer. She's turning it into a federal offense." Chloe rolled her eyes. She didn't look at me. "Mom, it's not worth it. Just give him the beer." Just give him the beer. The girl I used to sing lullabies to, the one I stayed up all night with when she had strep throat at 6 years old, the one I paid $120,000 for in private college tuition. She couldn't even make eye contact. She turned her back to me and stood beside Aiden. And that's when it happened. That shift in the air. That moment you realize you're standing in the middle of a house that you no longer recognize, surrounded by people you raised who now treat you like an outsider. Mom, Chloe said, her voice firm now. You need to decide. This is our house. Aiden and I pay the bills now. If you want to stay here, you need to respect that. She meant every word. She didn't say it in anger. She said it like she had rehearsed it, like it had been building up for weeks. Respect what? The countless groceries I bought from my Social Security, the insurance I paid on both their cars, the electric bill I covered when Aiden blew through his paycheck betting on sports. Aiden leaned against the counter, smug. So what's it gonna be, Dorothy? I heard the word echo, not Mom, not even Mrs. Bennett, just Dorothy. I looked at Chloe again, trying to find something, anything, that reminded me of the little girl who used to slip her hand into mine while crossing the street. But that girl was gone, or maybe just buried too deep. All right, I said. Aiden grinned. Good. Now about that beer, I'll pack. The grin vanished. Chloe's eyes widened. Wait. What I didn't answer. I turned around, walked slowly toward the hallway, each footstep solid on the hardwood. Richard and I installed with our own hands back in '98. The floor creaked a little under my weight. Maybe in warning, maybe in approval. In the bedroom, I pulled the old suitcase from the top of the closet, the one we'd used on our honeymoon to Yosemite. Still in good condition. A little worn around the zipper, but dependable. Like me. I didn't pack everything, just the essentials. Medications, glasses, 3 changes of clothes, my worn leather wallet, and the black and white photo of Richard, smiling in the garden. My hands were steady, my heart quiet. From the living room I heard whispers, Chloe's voice frantic, Aiden's lower trying to sound in control, but they didn't follow me. They didn't come to stop me. They didn't even say goodbye. I wheeled the suitcase to the front door. Aiden had returned to the recliner, but he looked uneasy now, like someone who just realized he'd poked the wrong bear. Chloe stood near the kitchen, arms folded tightly, chewing her lip. No one said a word. The Buick started on the first try, reliable like always. I pulled out of the driveway without looking back. Not once. It took 28 minutes to reach Pine Lodge. I parked under the old maple tree by room 6 and stepped out into the quiet. No tension in the air, no one waiting to judge or correct or demand. Just wind, just peace. I didn't know then what would come next, only that something had shifted permanently. I hadn't walked out in weakness. I hadn't slammed the door, screamed, or demanded anything. But in that silence, I took something with me that they didn't expect. I took back myself. The room at Pine Lodge was small, no frills, nothing fancy. Just a single bed with a blue floral quilt, a chipped desk near the window, and a mini fridge humming in the corner. The paint was faded and the curtains looked like they'd been there since the '90s. But it was quiet, and it was mine. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence press around me. The kind of silence that used to make me uncomfortable now felt like a balm. No Aiden's voice barking from the living room, no Chloe sighing dramatically as if I were a burden, just my own breath and the distant sound of traffic from the highway. The keycard was still in my hand. Room 6. Same number Richard and I had stayed in years ago when we were getting the kitchen remodeled. We'd laughed about how awful the coffee was, but how nice it was to be away from the mess. I remembered how we played cards late into the night. He always let me win. That was a long time ago. Now I was here again alone. But not lonely. Not exactly. I reached into my bag and pulled out my leather-bound journal. Not a diary. Never called it that. Just a place to jot down expenses, reminders, and things I didn't want to forget. I opened to a blank page and wrote the date in the corner. Then I stopped. My hand hovered over the paper as something caught in my chest. It wasn't sadness. It was something sharper. The thing is, when you're in the middle of giving, really giving, day in and day out, you don't always realize what's being taken. It sneaks up on you disguised as love. I had told myself for years that what I was doing was for Chloe, that helping her was helping our family, that Richard would have wanted it that way. But sitting there in that room on a stiff motel bed with a sagging mattress, I began to wonder, had it really been love? Or had I let myself become convenient? 5 years earlier, Chloe and Aiden had moved in just until they got on their feet. Aiden had lost his job at a car dealership. Laid off, he said, and Chloe was still paying off student loans. I didn't hesitate. Of course I welcomed them. I told them they could stay as long as they needed. I meant it too. I didn't expect to still be paying the mortgage 5 years later, or the car insurance, or the credit card minimums. At first it was little things. Chloe asking if I could cover the gas bill one month, Aiden needing help with his cell phone payment because unemployment hadn't kicked in yet. I said yes, always yes, I didn't even think about it. That's what mothers do, isn't it? But the just this once turned into, can you add us to your plan? And that turned into, it's easier if we put the house in your name for now since your credit is better. And that turned into me writing checks every month long after they'd both returned to work. I could still picture the spreadsheet I kept. Mortgage, $1.50. Insurance, $280. Groceries, $500 give or take. And the credit cards. That was the part that stung. Chloe had been added as an authorized user on my Visa and MasterCard. She said it would help build her credit. I didn't know she was using them for online shopping sprees and subscription boxes. I didn't know until the statements started arriving with balances I didn't recognize. I asked gently. She brushed it off, said she'd pay me back. She never did. And I didn't push. I had convinced myself that this was still my family, that what I was doing was keeping us together, that the money I spent was an investment in closeness, in trust, in love. But in that tiny motel room, I finally faced it. What I had built wasn't closeness. It was dependence. And not theirs. Mine. I had made myself necessary, hoping it would keep me from being forgotten. But it hadn't earned me love. It had earned me a role, a function. And when I stopped performing it, when I didn't get Aiden a beer fast enough, it became clear just how replaceable I was to them. They didn't see a mother or a woman who'd worked 40 years in accounting. They saw someone who was standing in the kitchen empty-handed and not moving quickly enough. I leaned back against the headboard and stared at the ceiling, the paint peeled at the corners. I should have felt humiliated. After all, I had gone from a 3-bedroom house to a room barely large enough to turn around in. But I didn't feel shame. I felt strangely clear. There was something liberating about knowing where I stood. I picked up the journal again and started listing every expense I had covered over the past 5 years. One by one. Not out of bitterness, but out of truth. I needed to see it in black and white. To stop hiding from the numbers the same way I had hidden from the emotional math. Tuition, $120,000. Wedding, $30,000. House down payment, $80,000. Monthly mortgage for 5 years, $69,000 utilities. Estimated $15,000 groceries, $28,000. Car insurance for both $1,600 to $800 credit card payments, $22,000. Total, $380, $800. My breath caught. I had known it was a lot, but seeing the number all at once unflinching was like cold water in the face. Almost $400,000. And I couldn't remember the last time Chloe had said thank you. There had been Christmas cards, a birthday dinner at Olive Garden, but there was no gratitude in her voice anymore. Only expectation. I set the pen down and closed the journal. Outside, a car drove past on the gravel lot, kicking up dust. The sun was beginning to dip below the trees. Shadows stretched long across the pavement. I stood and walked to the window. Behind the motel there was a walking path that led toward the river. Richard and I used to stroll there on Sunday mornings, coffee in hand. I slipped on my jacket and headed out needing the air. As I walked, I felt something shift in me. Not anger, not yet, just clarity. For 5 years I had told myself that what I was doing was love, but now I realized love wasn't supposed to look like silence, like disappearing one small piece at a time, like waiting for kindness that never came. Love wasn't supposed to look like begging for space in a house you paid for. It wasn't supposed to sound like your own daughter calling you unreasonable for needing rest, or like her husband calling you just another mouth to feed. Love wasn't supposed to leave you at a motel in your 70s feeling like the intruder in your own life. That night back in room 6, I didn't cry. Instead, I made a decision. This was not going to be the end of my story. I hadn't spent 40 years building a life paying off bills, saving every coupon, and checking every receipt just to be reduced to someone's unpaid servant. I hadn't walked out of that house to be small. I walked out to become whole again. The following morning, I woke before the sun. Room 6 was still and dark, except for the faint glow from the digital clock on the nightstand. It was just past 5 a.m., but I couldn't sleep. Not because I was worried, but because I was finally clear-headed. I'd spent years in a fog, doing giving sacrificing, without stopping to measure the cost. Now I was wide awake. I slipped into my slippers, wrapped my cardigan around my shoulders, and sat at the little desk by the window. My old laptop hummed to life with a familiar whir. The screen flickered, then settled into the soft blue glow of the login page. My fingers knew the password by heart. It had been years since I'd kept meticulous records for myself. I used to do it all the time when Richard was alive, tracking every dollar we spent, every bill paid, every coupon clipped. We treated our finances like a garden. If we tended it carefully, it would bloom. But once Chloe and Aiden moved in, I stopped paying attention. I let love blur the numbers. Now it was time to see clearly again. I opened my banking dashboard. Every account, every payment, every automatic draft. And there they were, lined up like soldiers. Mortgage, $152, due on the 1st. Auto insurance, $284, due on the 3rd. Utilities, $300, withdrawn mid-month. Visa, $223 minimum. Chloe's purchases from online clothing stores. MasterCard, $137, left over from that furniture set Aiden ordered without asking. The numbers didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how quickly I'd normalized them. Month after month, money slipped away from my retirement account to keep them afloat. And I had let it happen, convincing myself that being a good mother meant giving endlessly. But being a good mother doesn't mean erasing yourself. I clicked into the mortgage account first. It was still under my name. Of course it was. The house had been transferred into a trust, but I never completed the paperwork to remove myself from responsibility. I had set it up to protect the home for Chloe's future. I thought I was doing the right thing, but she'd shown me what she thought of that future. I clicked Cancel Autopay. The screen asked, "Are you sure you want to stop recurring payments for this account?" I took a slow breath. "Yes," I whispered. Click. Done. I moved on to the auto insurance. 2 vehicles under my policy. Aiden's Silverado and Chloe's compact Honda. Neither registered to me, neither driven by me. I'd been paying for both out of habit because Aiden claimed insurance under his name was too expensive. Not anymore. Remove vehicles from policy. Yes. Each confirmation message felt like lifting a stone off my chest. I hadn't realized how much weight I'd been carrying, how much fear I held in my body, worrying about what might happen if I ever stopped saying yes. I canceled the Visa and MasterCard authorizations next. Chloe had been an authorized user for years. It started in college. Just emergencies, she said. But the charges never stopped. Streaming services, fast fashion sites, monthly deliveries for who knows what. Little luxuries she never thought to ask me about. She assumed I'd keep covering them because I always had. Not anymore. By 7 a.m., I had canceled 6 auto payments and removed 2 authorized users. My accounts were finally my own again. The phone rang at 7:14. Chloe. I didn't answer. I watched it buzz quietly on the desk, vibrating like a bee trapped in a jar. After 3 rings, it stopped. Then a pause. Then again. The second call came at 7:18. I silenced it. 5 minutes later, the first voicemail notification appeared. Then a text, "Mom, did the mortgage payment bounce?" Aiden's freaking out. "Is there something wrong with the bank?" I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my notes app and wrote down a new entry. They noticed. Sooner than expected. At 8:02, the second voicemail came in. Chloe's voice was tight with panic. "Hey, Mom. I'm just checking in. I think something weird's going on with the accounts. We didn't get a confirmation on the mortgage payment, and Aiden's car insurance got flagged. Could you call me when you get a chance? Maybe there's a glitch." A glitch. Funny how it never occurred to her that I might have done it intentionally. By noon, there were 5 missed calls and 3 voicemails. The messages grew increasingly worried, but also more defensive. "Mom, if there's a problem, just say something. Don't make this weird. Are you okay? Did something happen at the motel? Is someone advising you to do this? Aiden says we should come by and talk face to face. Can we meet?" They still thought this was a misunderstanding. They still thought I could be talked down, persuaded, guilted back into place. But I had already left that version of myself behind. I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. I needed time. Time to plan. Time to breathe. Time to gather my next steps. In the quiet of that afternoon, I walked to the motel lobby and poured myself a cup of coffee from the old glass pot. It tasted burnt and stale, but somehow it felt earned. Steve, the motel manager, gave me a warm nod. He was ex-military, polite, but quiet. We didn't talk much, but I appreciated his calm presence. It was comforting to be around people who didn't expect anything from me. Back in my room, I opened my journal again. Next steps. I didn't just want to remove myself financially. I wanted to make sure they couldn't undo it. I needed to revisit my estate planning, the trust, the title, the insurance policies. Every document I had touched in the name of helping them, I would start undoing one signature at a time. But I also knew the emotional storm was only beginning. By early evening, Chloe called again. This time she was crying. "Mom, I don't know what's happening. The payment was rejected and they're saying we have to pay the full amount this week or we're in default. Aiden's car insurance is gone and my credit card declined at the pharmacy. Are you okay? Did someone hack your accounts?" That part made me pause. I could hear the fear in her voice, but also something else. Not remorse, not understanding, just confusion that her system had stopped working, that her version of normal had been interrupted. She didn't say, "Thank you." She didn't say, "I know we took advantage." She said, "Is something wrong with the bank?" It was easier for her to believe a computer had malfunctioned than to believe her mother had finally said, "Enough." I sat on the bed and looked around the tiny room. There wasn't much here. A nightstand, a lamp, my suitcase at the foot of the bed. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel owned by anyone else's expectations. I didn't feel like I had to perform to be loved. I didn't feel small. My phone buzzed again. Aiden this time. I didn't even check the voicemail. I already knew what it would say. Something clipped, annoyed, maybe even angry. I'd hear that sharp tone he used when things didn't go his way. But I didn't owe him anything. The giving was done. That evening, I walked to the diner down the street, ordered a grilled cheese and tomato soup, and watched the light fade through the window. The waitress refilled my coffee without asking. She smiled at me like I was just another regular. No history, no backstory. Just a woman alone with her thoughts. And I was fine with that. I sipped the coffee and looked down at my hands. Steady, certain. Let them call. Let them wonder. I wasn't afraid of their questions anymore, because I already knew my answer. It was Friday morning when I decided to walk into town. The air was brisk but not cold, and the sun peeked between clouds like it was still deciding whether or not it wanted to be out for the day. I'd been at Pine Lodge for almost a week, and my steps had grown steadier, more certain. I no longer avoided the sidewalks of Callahan Street or felt the sting of passing by familiar places. I held my chin higher. I was no longer hiding. I stopped at the Copper Mug Cafe, the little place Richard and I used to frequent on weekends. They'd updated the chairs and painted the walls since then, but the scent inside was still the same. Fresh, coffee-baked cinnamon rolls and a hint of nostalgia. I ordered my usual black coffee and a blueberry muffin. The young man at the counter called out my name like I was a stranger, which felt oddly comforting. I slid into a booth by the window and took a sip, letting the warmth settle in my chest. That's when I heard a familiar voice. Dorothy Bennett. Well, I'll be. I looked up and saw Linda Carter, her arms full of folders and a canvas tote bag slung over one shoulder. She hadn't changed much since our days at First National Bank. Same short haircut, same practical flats, same no-nonsense energy. "Linda," I said, genuinely smiling. "It's been too long." She set her things down and hugged me without asking. "Last I heard, you'd retired and were enjoying life on the lake." "That was the plan," I said gently. She slid into the seat across from me, giving me a look only old friends can pull off. "So what happened?" "You okay? I've had a week," I said carefully. Linda nodded, reading between the lines like she always had. "Well, if you ever want to talk numbers or get advice, I'm still at First National. I handle property loans and estate planning these days." At that, I paused. "Actually," I said slowly, "can I ask you something? Strictly off the record." Linda raised an eyebrow. "Of course." I took another sip of coffee before continuing. "Do you remember anyone, say a man named Aiden Mitchell, coming in about a loan using my address?" Her mouth twitched. "You're not asking hypothetically, are you?" I shook my head. Linda leaned back in her seat, folding her arms. 3 months ago. He came in with documents. Claimed to be the property owner at 42 Silver Maple Lane. That's my house." I know she said, then lowered her voice. "That's why it caught my attention. I recognized the address. The paperwork looked polished, but something felt off. I could feel my pulse start to quicken. What did he want? A home equity loan. $50,000. Said it was for renovations and urgent improvements." She rolled her eyes. "But the phrasing was textbook vague, and you didn't approve it. We flagged it before it even hit underwriting. Ran the title search. Came back with your name clear and clean, no cosigners, no liens, nothing." I stared at my coffee like it might suddenly explain how everything had gone so wrong. He never told me I said more to myself than to her, never even hinted. Linda leaned in, lowering her voice. "Dorothy, it wasn't a mistake. Those documents. They were forged. We didn't escalate it to law enforcement because no money changed hands. But it was intentional. The signature on the deed was traced. The notary stamp was fake. We kept everything on file in case it ever came up again. My throat went dry. All the years of giving supporting believing. And he had been planning to rob me in secret." "Do you know why?" I asked quietly. Linda hesitated, then glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "There are rumors. One of our tellers is dating someone who works at Glacier Peaks Casino." I didn't say anything. Just waited. "She's seen him there, Aiden, playing poker, blackjack, whatever he can. They say he's been coming in more often betting higher amounts." The chair beneath me suddenly felt unstable. "Do you know how much he owes Word? It's just under 20,000. Not all to the casino, though. He's borrowed from a few. Less official sources. Some of them don't like waiting for payments." The pieces began clicking together like a cruel puzzle. The mood swings, the stress, the desperation I'd mistaken for pressure from work. The sudden push to make me leave. The beer wasn't the issue. It was control. He needed me gone, and not just emotionally. He needed the house. Because without it, he had no collateral. He was going to use my home, I said, more to myself than to her. To pay his gambling debts. Linda reached across the table and placed a firm hand over mine. I didn't say anything sooner because I didn't know the whole story. But now that you've asked, I think you need to be very careful. Aiden isn't just desperate, he's dangerous. I nodded, though my mind was a swirl of memories. Birthday dinners, game nights, Sunday brunch. He'd laughed in my kitchen while planning to steal my house. And Chloe, did she know? Had she turned a blind eye, or had she simply chosen not to ask? I didn't have those answers yet, but I did know one thing. This was no longer about a failed relationship or a mother feeling unappreciated. This was about theft. This was about betrayal. And it was about protecting myself from here on out. Linda, I said, steadying my voice. Do you still have the file? Every page? Would you be willing to provide a copy in case I need to involve the authorities? Without hesitation, she nodded. Absolutely. And Dorothy. If you need a lawyer, I know a few good ones that specialize in elder financial abuse. I winced at the phrase, but I didn't correct her, because that's what it was, whether I wanted to admit it or not. I finished my coffee in silence while Linda packed up her things. She squeezed my hand once more before leaving and promised to email the documentation before the end of the day. I sat there long after she was gone, watching the world outside the window, wondering how long he had been planning it. Wondering what else he might try now that the money was gone and his secret was exposed. I reached for my phone and opened my notes app again. I added 2 new lines. Aiden tried to take the house, $20,000 in gambling debt, then I added a third. It's time to fight back. By the time Monday rolled around, I was done waiting. After everything I had learned from Linda at the cafe, the forged documents, the gambling debts, the fake notary stamp, I knew Aiden wasn't just desperate, he was calculated and dangerous. The fact that he'd tried to mortgage a house he didn't own told me this wasn't a man who'd made a single bad choice. He'd made a plan, and the plan had included me being gone. He just didn't expect that I'd leave on my own terms. At 9 a.m., I stood outside the Flathead County Courthouse. The red brick building towered over Main Street like a reminder that some things still worked the way they were supposed to. I walked inside clutching a folder filled with every legal document I still had: property deed tax statements, confirmation letters from the bank. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of finally taking action. I approached the clerk at the civil division window. She looked up over her glasses and gave me a polite smile. I need to file an eviction notice, I said, my voice calm. For my daughter and her husband. They've overstayed their welcome and they're no longer respecting the terms of our arrangement. She didn't flinch, just nodded and pulled out the necessary paperwork. Are they tenants on a lease? No. Verbal agreement only, Basamanab. But the property is in my name, and I've been the one paying the mortgage and all utilities. They don't pay rent. Never have. She nodded again. State law requires a 30-day written notice for informal occupants. If they contest the eviction, we'll set a hearing. If not, you can file for physical removal after the notice period. She handed me the form and pointed to the section where I needed to explain the reason for the eviction. I took a pen and wrote in clear, even letters: violation of verbal agreement, breach of trust, financial exploitation, failure to contribute to household expenses or respect property owner's authority. I handed the paper back. Within 15 minutes it was stamped and processed. The clock had officially started. They had 30 days to get out. I walked out of the courthouse into the morning sun, breathing deeper than I had in weeks. But I wasn't done. There was another stop to make. The police station sat just a few blocks away. I didn't bother calling ahead. I walked straight in and asked to speak with Detective Marcus Hayes. He was an older man with thick glasses and the kind of voice that sounded like he'd spent 20 years trying not to raise it. His office was cluttered but organized, and he greeted me with a handshake and a curious expression. I was told you handle financial abuse cases, I said. That's correct. You're Mrs. Bennett, I am. He motioned for me to sit. What can I do for you today? I laid my folder on the desk, opened it, and slid out the photocopies Linda had emailed me. Aiden's forged loan documents, the flagged title search, the rejection letter from the bank. Then I pulled out a second set of papers, a timeline I had started building. Every major expense I'd covered for Chloe and Aiden, every payment I had made, every action they had taken since I left. I'm concerned about escalating behavior, I said, steady but firm. He's already tried to defraud the bank. I have reason to believe he's been gambling and borrowing from dangerous people. And now he's started showing up near where I'm staying. That got Marcus's attention. Where are you staying now? Pine Lodge Motel. Room 6. Last night he stood in the parking lot for 10 minutes. Didn't knock. Just stood there, watching. Did you report it? I told the night manager. He saw it too. There's footage. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Do you feel threatened? I feel watched, I said. I feel like I'm being monitored. And considering what I've uncovered, I'm not taking any chances. He tapped his pen against the desk. We can issue a restraining order, Mrs. Bennett. It won't stop him from making bad decisions, but it will give us grounds to arrest him if he comes within 500 feet of you. That's exactly what I want. Marcus nodded and began writing. I'll need to file a report and attach the supporting documentation. If you can get me that security footage from the motel, it'll strengthen your case. I'll have it by tomorrow morning. He smiled faintly. You're remarkably prepared. I used to be a bookkeeper, I said. Details matter. By noon, I had completed the paperwork for both the eviction and the restraining order. As I sat back down in my motel room with a sandwich from the deli down the street, I opened my laptop and created a new folder. The title bar blinked as I typed, Mitchell Evidence, Do Not Ignore. I added everything. The fake loan application, bank confirmations, insurance cancellation notices, emails showing Chloe had authorized herself on my credit cards, voicemails from Chloe and Aiden growing increasingly agitated, and a bullet point list of everything I had paid over the past 5 years. I didn't include it out of spite. I included it to protect myself. Because I knew what was coming. I knew they would try to twist the story to paint me as confused or bitter or emotionally unstable. Aiden had already started whispering it to anyone who'd listen. That I was changing, that I was being influenced by outside voices. That I was becoming paranoid. No. I was becoming clear. That afternoon, I picked up the phone again. This time, I called the creditors. Not to pay anything, not to interfere, just to make something perfectly clear. The first call was to Frontier Lending. Yes, I'm calling regarding Aiden Mitchell. I believe he's listed my property at 42 Silver Maple Lane as his primary residence. That is incorrect. He no longer resides there and has no legal or financial claim to the home. I repeated the message 6 more times with 6 different agencies. One of them asked if I was trying to dispute the debts. No, I said calmly. I'm simply clarifying that if he defaults, the house cannot be considered collateral. So, I have filed for eviction and a restraining order is in progress. By the end of the day, I had documented each call, each agency name, each reference number. I knew Aiden would be furious, but I was no longer concerned with his comfort. The next morning, I stopped by the motel office and asked Steve, the night manager, if he had the security footage from the night before. He nodded and handed me a flash drive. He didn't say anything, but he was pacing, looked angry, kept staring up at your door. Would you be willing to share that with the police if they ask? Absolutely, he said. No one should feel unsafe here, especially not someone like you. I thanked him and walked back to my room with the small piece of plastic in my hand. Another detail. Another layer of truth. Another step toward safety. As I sat at the desk and plugged the drive into my laptop, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. I wasn't just trying to survive anymore. I was taking back my life, one decision at a time. By Wednesday, the gossip had started circling. I could feel it in the way people looked at me when I walked into Annie's coffee shop. A few friendly faces still smiled, but others glanced away, hesitant. It wasn't paranoia. It was the same town I'd lived in for decades, the same people who used to wave when Richard and I walked our dog through the park. Small towns have long memories and short leashes for drama. The rumors had a strange energy. I hadn't said a word publicly. I hadn't accused anyone. All I had done was take back control of my life. But Aiden, it seemed, had been talking. I found out from the pastor's wife. She pulled me aside after I dropped off a donation at the church pantry. Her voice was kind but laced with concern. "Dorothy, I just thought you should know. Aiden's been saying things. To people. At the bar, the hardware store. Even to some folks at the bank." I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of things that you've been confused? That you're having memory issues? That you've been manipulated by someone into canceling your support for him and Chloe?" I closed my eyes briefly. It didn't surprise me. This was textbook Aiden. He wasn't trying to fix the damage. He was trying to rewrite the story before the truth could land. That night, my phone rang around 9:30. "Chloe." I let it go to voicemail. She called again. Then a third time. Finally, I answered. "Mom." Her voice was already shaky. "Yes, Chloe." Her breath caught. "Why are you doing this?" "The mortgage payment bounced. The credit cards are frozen. Aiden lost his job. We have creditors calling. What is happening? I told you, I'm not supporting you anymore." "You don't understand," she said quickly. "I'm pregnant." There was a long silence. "You're what I just found out last week. We haven't told anyone yet. But all this stress, it's not good. The doctor said I need to stay calm. That the baby could be at risk if I don't." Something inside me flinched. Not because of the news, but because of how she used it. "You saw a doctor?" I asked. "Yes. At the women's clinic. It was just a preliminary appointment, but—" "Which doctor?" There was a pause. "Dr. Bennett." That was the moment I knew something was off. Audrey Bennett had been my own doctor for years before I retired. She was professional, kind, and thorough. If Chloe had seen her, she would have told me. Audrey would have called. She always followed up with family members she knew personally, especially with sensitive news. "I'll call her in the morning," I said calmly, "to ask how I can help with the medical bills." There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then Chloe's voice tightened. "You don't need to do that. It's private. I want to help if there's truly a medical concern." Her voice turned sharp. "You can't just call my doctor Mom. That's not how it works. You brought her up, Chloe." I ended the call. The next morning I called Dr. Bennett's office. The receptionist remembered me and transferred the call directly. "Dorothy." "It's been a while. I know. I'm sorry to call like this, but I have a difficult question. Did Chloe Parker come in recently for a pregnancy appointment?" There was a pause. Then a soft response. "No. Not that I'm aware of. Her name hasn't come through our intake system. If she had, I would have recognized it." I nodded slowly, though Audrey couldn't see it. "That's what I thought. Thank you, Audrey. I just needed to be sure." After we hung up, I stared at my phone. My own daughter had lied to me about carrying a child, just to manipulate me into resuming payments. She wasn't just trying to tug at my heart. She was trying to weaponize it. Later that day, I ran errands downtown. I needed printer paper for my records and stopped into the small supply shop across from First National Bank. As I crossed the sidewalk, I heard him. "Aiden." His voice carried like it always did when he wanted to be heard. Loud, insistent, confident. "She's not well," he was telling a small group near the bank's main entrance. "I mean, she's old. It happens. Memory issues, getting paranoid, canceling accounts left and right." Someone murmured a response I couldn't hear. "She thinks I'm stealing from her," he added with a fake laugh. "It's absurd. The woman's been talking to bank managers saying I forged documents. I mean, come on. She barely knows how to use email. I didn't plan to walk over. But I did." I stepped through the group slowly, letting them see me, letting the moment stretch. Aiden saw me mid-sentence. His smile froze. I looked around, making eye contact with each face in the circle. Some of them I recognized, some I didn't. Then I turned to him. "I may not know much about email," I said quietly, "but I do know what forged paperwork looks like, especially when it's signed with my name and a fake notary stamp." His face went pale. "I also know what $20,000 in gambling debt looks like." A few people in the group gasped softly. "And I know what it feels like when the man you welcomed into your home tries to steal it out from under you." Aiden tried to speak, but I raised my hand. "I spoke to Dr. Bennett this morning." I said, my voice still even. "She hasn't seen Chloe. There's no pregnancy. Just another attempt to guilt me back into paying for your lies." The murmurs around us grew louder. "I'm not confused, Aiden. I'm not paranoid. I'm done." And with that, I turned and walked away. I didn't need to see his reaction. I didn't need to hear the whispers that followed. Because I knew from the shift in the air that the story he had tried so hard to control had just slipped out of his hands. By the time I reached the end of the block, I heard someone behind me say, "Good for her." I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The truth had finally spoken for itself, and it didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. By Friday morning, I could feel the shift in the air. People no longer looked at me with confusion or hesitation. Their eyes had changed. There was recognition in them now, something closer to quiet respect. The lie Aiden had tried to spin had started to crumble, and the truth, as it always does, found its way through the cracks. At the hardware store, Tom Kowalski paused mid-inventory to ask if I needed help carrying a paint sample I didn't even realize I'd been staring at. I smiled and shook my head. But before I turned away, he said, "Dorothy, I heard what happened. If you ever need anything, you just say the word. We've all got your back." Later at the post office, Mrs. Henderson from church leaned over the counter and whispered, "We all wondered how they managed that big wedding and the house on Aiden's salary. Didn't realize you were the one footing the bill all these years. Bless your heart for your patience. It wasn't just words. It was tone, body language, the way people stepped aside for me to pass or made eye contact that lingered just a second longer than usual. I wasn't invisible anymore. Or maybe more accurately, I was being seen for the first time in years. The ripple effect of the truth was spreading. I hadn't planned it that way. I never went out to tell my side of the story. I simply stopped hiding. And that was enough. The phone calls from Chloe changed tone, too. The first few voicemails earlier in the week had been pleading apologetic. Now they were panicked. "Mom, there are men coming to the door asking about Aiden's debts. They're saying they might garnish wages or seize assets. I don't understand any of this." There were more. Aiden got let go today. His boss said the drama was becoming a distraction to customers. He's furious. He says it's your fault. And then finally the sheriff came by, served us some legal papers. Aiden's been yelling for hours. I don't know what to do. I listened to each message once, then saved them to a folder on my laptop. I didn't respond, not because I was cold, because I had already said all there was to say. Detective Hayes called that afternoon to confirm the restraining order had been officially approved. Aiden was now legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of me or the motel. Any violation would lead to immediate arrest. I thanked him, and after we hung up, I sat for a long time in the quiet of room 6. I had never wanted it to come to this. Not really. But I wasn't sorry. Some things are necessary, and some lines once crossed need to be marked permanently. That evening I walked to the lake and sat on the bench Richard and I used to favor. The sky was soft with the gold of early evening, the water glimmering gently under the breeze. I held a sealed envelope in my hands, the one I'd signed earlier that day at the lawyer's office. Inside it was a newly updated will. A new future. I had removed Chloe's name from the inheritance. The house at 42 Silver Maple Lane would no longer go to her. Instead, it had been legally designated as a gift to the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative, a program that helped families of returning service members rebuild their lives with dignity. 3 units would be renovated inside the house. 3 families who had known sacrifice, hardship, and service would live under a roof that once held only silence and resentment. The thought gave me peace. The kind of peace I hadn't known in years. Not because I was punishing anyone, but because I was finally giving to people who would understand what that meant. When I returned to the motel, there was a voicemail from Pastor Williams. "Dorothy, I just wanted to let you know that people have been asking about you at the church. Not out of gossip, out of concern, out of admiration. Some of them are saying you've reminded them of what quiet strength looks like. You're always welcome here. Just thought you should hear that." I played the message twice. The next day I stopped by the grocery store and bumped into Emily, one of Chloe's former classmates. She hadn't seen me in years but recognized me instantly. I just want to say she told me, lowering her voice, "Everyone knows the truth now. And a lot of us are proud of you. Most people would have stayed silent. But you showed us that boundaries aren't about being cruel. They're about finally loving yourself too." At the checkout line, a young man tapped me on the shoulder. He looked barely 20, maybe an employee at Aiden's old dealership. "Sorry to bother you, ma'am," he said. "But I heard what happened. That took guts. Not a lot of people stand up like that anymore." I thanked him with a smile, my heart both heavy and light. That night, I lit a candle for Richard and sat at the desk reviewing my paperwork again. Mortgage history, will updates, letters to creditors, documentation of every payment I'd ever made on behalf of Chloe and Aiden. It was all there, organized in a binder labeled Mitchell Evidence, Do Not Ignore. But now I was closing the file. The evidence had done its work. And the truth had legs of its own. It no longer needed me to carry it. I was finally free. Not just from the debts, not just from the house. Free from the role I had let define me for too long. The quiet helper, the always reliable mother, the safety net no one thanked. I was no longer their bank, no longer their shield. I was Dorothy Bennett again, fully, completely, and for the first time in decades, that was more than enough. I called Chloe on a Thursday morning. My voice was calm as always, but she must have heard the firmness beneath it. I asked her to meet me at the diner. Just her. No Aiden, no distractions. She hesitated, said she wasn't sure if she could get away, that Aiden was in a bad place, that things were complicated. "Then, we have nothing to discuss," I said simply. "This conversation is for us, no one else." There was a long silence on the line before she finally said, "Okay, 2:00. 2:00, back corner booth." I arrived early. The staff at May's Diner knew me by now. I ordered a pot of coffee and settled into the booth facing away from the door. I wanted to focus on the words, not on the street or who might be walking by. Chloe arrived 10 minutes late. She looked thinner than I remembered, her eyes tired, her hair pulled into a messy bun like she hadn't slept in days. Her coat hung loose on her frame and she clutched her purse like a lifeline. When she slid into the seat across from me, she didn't look up right away. "I didn't know what to wear," she murmured. "Isn't that stupid?" I didn't respond. I just poured her a cup of coffee and slid it across the table. She took a sip, then finally met my eyes. "Things are bad," she said. I nodded. "I know. Aiden's losing it. We've had 3 collectors at the door this week. His credit's ruined. Mine too, probably. He's saying we might need to leave town. And you—" she hesitated. "I don't know. Part of me wants to go. Part of me is ashamed to show my face." I folded my hands on the table. "You should be." Her eyes welled up. "Mom, I'm sorry. I never thought it would get this far, but it did, because you let it—" She looked down again, the weight of it sinking in. "I didn't know he'd gone that far," she whispered. "I didn't know about the forged documents or the gambling or that he tried to take out a loan on the house. I swear, you didn't ask," I said. "You didn't want to know, because not knowing meant you didn't have to choose." She didn't argue. We sat in silence for a moment, just the hum of the diner and the clink of dishes in the background. "I'm offering you one chance," I said finally. She looked up. "One chance to end this with dignity. To begin rebuilding. Not for Aiden, not for the house, not for the money. For you." Her eyes searched mine. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you want to restore any part of our relationship, you need to tell the truth. Fully. Publicly." Her mouth opened, then closed. "I'm asking for 3 things," I continued. "First, a post on Facebook, visible to your friends, family, coworkers. Second, a statement this Sunday during testimony time at church. Third, a letter to the editor of the Callahan County Tribune." She went pale. "You want me to humiliate myself?" "No," I said quietly. "I want you to tell the truth. There's a difference." Her voice trembled. "But people will think... They'll think you had a mother who paid for your college, your wedding, your home, who gave you everything she had while you stood by and let her be treated like an intruder in her own house." She bit her lip, trying to hold back tears. "They'll think," I said gently, "that you finally took responsibility. That you chose honesty over pride. That's not humiliation. That's courage." She looked away, blinking fast. "What about the house?" she asked after a long moment. "Is there any way... I mean, if I do all of that..." I shook my head. "No," I said. "The house is no longer part of this conversation. But I've already changed the will," I continued. "It's been signed, witnessed, and filed. The house is going to the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative. They're turning it into transitional housing for families who've served this country and need help getting back on their feet." Her shoulders slumped. "You gave away my inheritance." "No," I said. "I reclaimed my dignity, and I gave a home to people who understand the value of sacrifice, people who won't take it for granted." Chloe wiped at her eyes, her face pale and drawn. "I don't know if I can do it," she whispered. "Stand in front of all those people and admit what we did." "You can," I said, "but only if you want to build something real with me again." She said nothing. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded paper. I slid it across the table. It was a list. Bullet points. Each item beginning with a $sign. "This is what I paid for you over 5 years," I said. "College tuition, wedding down payment, mortgage, insurance, groceries, credit cards. Nearly $400,000. She scanned the paper, her eyes widening. "I didn't know it was that much." "You never asked." She put the paper down slowly. "If I do this, all of it, what happens then?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Then we begin again, slowly, as 2 adults, not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but with mutual respect, one conversation at a time." She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks now. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know I said, but sorry isn't enough anymore. I need action. I need to see that the daughter I raised still exists beneath all this." Chloe reached for a napkin and wiped her eyes, then looked me in the face. "I'll do it," she said. "I don't know if I'll do it well, but I'll do it." I took a slow sip of coffee and nodded. "I'll be at church Sunday morning," I said. 10 o'clock. If you're there, I'll listen. And if I'm not, I set my cup down. Then I'll know you made your choice." She didn't speak again, just sat there staring at the napkin in her hands. When she stood to leave, she looked older than she had when she arrived. At the door, she turned back, once her voice barely audible. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I held her gaze. "Forgiveness is a decision," I said, "but trust. That has to be earned back one honest step at a time." She nodded, then walked out into the cold February air. I stayed at the booth watching her disappear down the sidewalk. Sunday would come soon enough. Sunday morning arrived cloaked in a quiet stillness. The sky was pale, the air still sharp with the lingering cold of late winter, but there was sunlight peeking through the clouds like a promise. I parked my car just outside St. Mark's Lutheran Church, the familiar brick building where I'd spent so many years in worship, in grief, in celebration. Today, though, I wasn't sure what I was here for. Hope, perhaps. or closure. I walked slowly to the front doors, my hands tucked into the pockets of my coat. The sanctuary inside was already half full, more than usual for a Sunday this early. Word had gotten around. In small towns like ours, stories moved faster than morning light. I nodded at a few familiar faces. Some nodded back. Others just watched me pass, their expressions unreadable. I took my usual seat. Third pew from the front left side. The same one Richard and I used to sit in. The same pew I hadn't occupied since everything began unraveling. The choir sang softly in the background. The air smelled faintly of wax candles and aging hymnals. Pastor Williams began the service as he always did, with prayer and scripture and a gentle sense of steadiness. But beneath it all, there was a hum of anticipation, an unspoken awareness that something was different about today. When the moment came for personal testimonies, Pastor Williams looked out across the sanctuary, then nodded toward the back. Chloe stood up. The room went quiet. She walked slowly down the aisle, her heels tapping softly against the hardwood floor. Her posture was nervous but steady, like someone walking through fog, unsure but willing. She reached the front, climbed the small steps to the lectern, and turned to face the congregation. Her hands gripped the wooden edges tightly. I saw her take a deep breath. "My name is Chloe Parker," she began, her voice low but clear. "Most of you know me. Some of you watched me grow up in this church." She paused, scanning the room, avoiding my eyes. "I'm here today because I have something I need to say. Something I should have said a long time ago." The sanctuary was silent, not even the fidgeting of restless children. Every ear was tuned to her voice. For the past 5 years, my mother, Dorothy Bennett, has supported me and my husband financially. Not just in small ways, but in every way. She looked down at a small note card in her hand, then back up. She paid for my college tuition. Over $100,000. She paid for my wedding, the venue, the flowers, my dress, when Aiden's family couldn't contribute. She gave us the down payment for our home. When we couldn't afford the mortgage, she paid that too. When bills piled up, she paid those. When our car insurance lapsed, she added us to her policy. When credit card debt grew, she covered it without ever asking questions. A few gasps rippled through the pews. People shifted, exchanging glances. She did all of this while living on a fixed income, while grieving the loss of my father, while asking for nothing in return. Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. I allowed my husband to speak to her with disrespect. I stood by while he dismissed her, ignored her, treated her like she didn't belong in the house she paid for. And when she finally had enough, when she packed her suitcase and walked out, I stayed. She looked directly at me for the first time, her eyes shining with tears. I stayed with the man who lied to her, stole from her, and tried to take the home she built. And I stayed silent. Pastor Williams stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Chloe nodded but didn't move. "I came here today because my mother gave me one last chance to tell the truth. Not to save my reputation, not to reclaim an inheritance, but because if there is any hope of rebuilding what we lost, it starts with honesty." She looked back out at the congregation, her voice now steadier. "My mother showed me what dignity looks like. She showed me what it means to walk away from a toxic situation, not with bitterness, but with strength. She reminded me that boundaries are not betrayal. And today I want to say I'm sorry." There were a few murmurs of support from the crowd. Someone near the back dabbed at their eyes with a tissue. Chloe stepped down from the lectern and returned to her seat, not beside me but back near the rear of the sanctuary. She didn't look at me again. But that was okay. The words had been enough. After the service, as the congregation filed out into the crisp air, I stayed in the pew. People approached. Some with hugs, others with quiet affirmations. "You raised her right, Dorothy." Took a lot of courage for her to say that. "We're all proud of both of you." I nodded, smiled, accepted their kindness without deflecting it, which was new for me. It felt like the town wasn't just witnessing a moment. They were participating in it. Eventually, the sanctuary emptied out and Chloe approached slowly. "Mom," she said quietly. I turned to her. Her face was pale, her eyes tired, but her voice was clear. "I filed for divorce. I didn't react right away." I let her continue. "Yesterday morning, I found out Aiden had been using my credit cards. He'd opened 2 under my name. He maxed them out at Glacier Peaks and tried to reroute the mail so I wouldn't see the statements." I exhaled slowly, not in shock, but in confirmation. "I should have known sooner," she said, "but I didn't want to look. I didn't want to admit what he was. What changed? You," she said simply. "You walking away. You refusing to engage. It made me stop waiting for someone else to fix everything." I nodded. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she added quickly. I want you to know I heard you. And I'm trying." That's all I needed to hear. I didn't forgive her in that moment. That would take time. Trust had to be rebuilt like anything else, brick by brick. But I did reach for her hand, and she took it. Quietly. Gratefully. We stood there together in the quiet of the church we both once loved, surrounded by light streaming in through stained glass. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic gestures, just 2 women, mother and daughter, standing on the edge of something new. Not perfect, but honest. And that was a start. The cabin wasn't much, but it was mine. A simple structure nestled at the edge of Pine Lake with weathered wood siding, and a porch just wide enough for a rocking chair, and a small table where I could rest my morning coffee. The lake shimmered under the spring sun, quiet except for the occasional call of a loon or the ripple of wind across the water. It had once been a vacation rental years ago before the owners put it up for sale. I bought it the week after Chloe spoke at church. Paid in full. No mortgage. No strings. Just peace. Every morning I'd rise with the sun, fix a pot of coffee, and sit outside wrapped in a flannel blanket. I'd listen to the birds, feel the cold mug warming my hands, and let my thoughts drift wherever they pleased. Some days I read, some days I wrote in a notebook. Just observations, small memories, sometimes prayers. The stillness became a kind of healing, a rhythm that reminded me of who I had been before everything got so loud. And yet I didn't entirely shut the door on the past. From time to time I drove by the old house, not to spy, just to witness. It looked different now. The porch had been painted a soft blue. New curtains fluttered in the windows. A swing set had been installed in the backyard. The laughter of children carried through the fence on warmer days. 3 families had moved in. Veterans and their loved ones. People who had known hardship and resilience. The Montana Veterans Housing Initiative had done a beautiful job dividing the space into 3 apartments, each with its own entrance kitchen and small garden patch. Sometimes I'd park across the street and just watch for a few minutes. One morning, I saw a woman planting tulips with her daughter. Another day, a man in a wheelchair rolled down the ramp that used to lead to my kitchen door, smiling as his service dog trotted beside him. I never introduced myself. They didn't know the house had once been mine. That anonymity felt like freedom. I didn't need anyone to know what I had done. I just needed to know that it mattered. One Thursday afternoon, as I was flipping through an old gardening magazine on the porch, my phone buzzed. I had grown used to the silence of not being contacted much anymore, so the sound startled me. It was a message from Chloe. "Hi, Mom. I started therapy last week, twice a week with Dr. Mallory Fields. She's kind and it's hard, but I'm trying. I was wondering, would you meet me for coffee sometime, just to talk? No expectations." I stared at the message for a long while. In another life, I might have responded immediately, flooded with relief. But I had learned not to rush into emotion, not to leap at every olive branch before checking if it was real. Instead, I took my time. I made a second cup of tea. I watched the wind move through the pine trees across the lake. And then I picked up the phone and wrote my reply. Saturday, 10 a.m., old diner. But this time only the truth will earn back my trust. I didn't dress up that Saturday. Just wore a soft blue sweater and my old jeans, the ones with the frayed seams that still somehow made me feel steady. I arrived 5 minutes early. The waitress, Hannah, recognized me right away and poured me my usual without asking. You've got that quiet glow about you, she said with a wink. Something changed. Maybe everything I said smiling gently. Chloe walked in exactly at 10. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her coat buttoned to the collar, eyes clear but nervous. She looked around, spotted me, and approached slowly. No hug, just a soft, "Hi, hi," I said back. She sat across from me, placed her phone screen down on the table, an act I took as respect, and folded her hands. "I wanted to thank you for your message," she began. "I wasn't sure you'd respond. I needed to think," I said. "I understand." There was a long pause before she continued. "I'm learning things in therapy, about boundaries, about codependency, about how much I let Aiden define what I believed about you and about myself." I nodded. "I was angry," she said quietly, "but I wasn't angry at you. I was angry that you were right, that everything I'd built my life around was crumbling and the only person I could blame was myself." She looked down at the table, tracing a finger along the edge of her napkin. "I'm sorry for what I let happen, and for how long I let it go on. I know it doesn't erase anything. I want to do better." "What does better look like to you?" I asked gently. Not expecting anything from you, not trying to fix things overnight. Just showing up, with honesty, and accepting whatever comes next. She looked up and I saw something in her I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. Vulnerability without manipulation. I brought something, she said, reaching into her purse. She slid an envelope across the table. I opened it slowly. Inside was a typed letter. "To whom it may concern. I, Chloe Parker, voluntarily and permanently waive any claim to the estate or property of Dorothy Bennett, including but not limited to the residence at 42 Silver Maple Lane. This decision is made of my own accord without coercion and with full understanding of legal implications. It was signed, dated, notarized. I wanted you to have it," she said. "Not because you asked for it, but because I needed to prove that I'm not here for money. I'm here because I miss my mother." I folded the paper carefully and placed it back into the envelope. The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was spacious. The waitress came by to refill our cups. Chloe ordered pancakes. I smiled and ordered toast. It wasn't a celebration. It wasn't a reunion. It was something smaller, and somehow more sacred. A beginning. As we ate, we talked about small things. Books, recipes, the lake. She asked if I'd ever consider letting her visit the cabin someday. I told her I wasn't sure yet, but I'd think about it. When we parted, she didn't ask for a hug. She just said, "I hope we can meet again soon." And I said, "So do I." As I drove back to the lake, I felt no rush of emotion, no dramatic swell of music in my mind, just a quiet warmth like sunlight on water. I had found peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had chosen myself, my truth, my boundaries, my life. And in doing so, I had given Chloe the space to find her own. That morning, as I stood on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee, I watched the breeze ripple across the lake and thought, sometimes the most powerful stories don't end with victory. They end with dignity and the courage to begin again. Have you ever been asked to choose between your dignity and your family? Dorothy's story reminds us that quiet strength often speaks louder than confrontation. That love without boundaries becomes sacrifice without appreciation. If you've ever felt unseen, unappreciated, or taken for granted by the very people you gave everything to, this story was for you. What would you have done in Dorothy's place? Would you have walked away? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss more powerful revenge stories, real family drama, and moments of raw betrayal that lead to redemption. We'll be here, sharing voices that deserve to be heard.